Oregon spring game is Saturday, and yeah, that's got recruiting ramifications. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show. Please and thank you. And a special thank you to my everydayers out there. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Not less, more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether you win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We've got Brian Smith here today, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network, brought to you as always by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. Let's hop right in, Brian. The spring game is really the biggest recruiting draw in spring that programs have, but why is it especially important for Oregon?
Because of location. Oregon needs as many visits as they can get from California kids, Texas kids, Georgia kids, Maryland, PA, wherever. As we know, Oregon takes, 2-3 kids a year, give or take, from in-state. So they need more of a plethora of visits from players. That means unofficials, and seeing their campus and all their incredible facilities, which I'm sure that's not a hard sell. But if they're not going to see it firsthand, it's probably not going to work out to get them back on campus for the officials and eventually signed letter of intent.
What is the schedule like? Because there comes a dead period in the summer. Is that in June?
June is wide open. That's all the officials.
Okay.
It's May in June. They've switched it around. Like, there are guys that have already taken official visits. So, I mean, they changed it again. So don't ask me. Yeah, I know. I mean, they hate me and I hate them. So it is what it is. It's the most infuriating organization I know outside of the Olympic Committee resides in Indianapolis. So I think that the basic here is these kids are going to be frequently going back and forth. Schools all over. May is the most important because that's the evaluation period. Coaches stop by high schools and see players and see them practice, see spring games, etc. But there's visits going to be going on like the last weekend, I believe, maybe even a little before for some kids in May. And it's just from now until about July 5th, July 6th, right after the 4th, it'll be nonstop recruiting for these staffs because they don't have anything else they can do. They're not allowed to work with their own players. So recruiting takes center stage. Yeah,
and certainly Oregon's able to practice right now, but then there will come that dead period where recruiting will
100%.
Will really, really start to pick up. If Oregon fans listening to or watching this are thinking about kind of the timeline here, and certainly, we've seen with guys like Cooper Perry, the 2025 class start to pick up steam, but there are going to be a lot more commitments. There's only one player on the defensive side of the ball right now, and this class will be built over the summer. How quickly do you think that sort of momentum could start to pick up after Saturday?
It depends on who comes and like how many visits in they are. I mean, Lanning and his staff do a really good job. You would have to think they'd get a commitment, out of somebody, because if you're making the effort for a lot of these guys to go multiple states over, it's a big deal. Even the California kids, like if you're from LA, that's not close to Eugene. So I'm curious to see if they can get anybody to punch their ticket within the next week based on this visit. And then if not, maybe it's just as important, maybe not as exciting. Do they gain any more official visits or anything else from this that's tangible that we can write about, that's in the books, etc.? That's what I always talk about on here and every other show. It's not what they say, it's what they do. So if they give you information, at least, hey, I booked my visit, I liked it, now I'm coming back for an OB, then you're like, okay, Oregon's got a legit shot here and fill in player's name. That's the key. This is a big deal for them. Again, not many schools are like Oregon that's a national program but don't have much in-state power with recruiting. They're the exception to the rule, so they got to make the most of this.
And Oregon has a good-looking visitor list for the spring game. Names that I've been told are going to be there. You've got Jakeem Stewart, who's one of the top kids, not in 2025, but in 2026, because, well, that's just how recruiting works. You think about just an Oregon basketball example, for instance. Dana Altman first recruited Jackson Shelstad when he was in 8th grade, and that's just the way it is. And guess what? Jackson Shelstad is Oregon's point guard this year and was this past year as well. That's sometimes what it takes to get those sorts of kids. But sure. A guy who we've talked about on the show before, DJ Pickett, he's expected to be in attendance for the spring game. 5-star defensive back. Blake Woodby is a 4-star corner who is crystal balled to Ohio State. Cooper Perry, who is an Oregon verbal commit in 2025 at the wide receiver position out of the state of Arizona. He's going to be there as well. I don't think that is the entire list. Those are just the names that I've been able to confirm are going to be there on their visits. And you know, what is that like, Brian? Have you seen these sorts of spring games up close before where you have this kind of hodgepodge of players? Do relationships get formed? Or like, what is it like to go on a visit when you know other guys are there that weekend as well for that game?
Depends on the school. Like, I've been to a Miami spring game, and that's a bunch of kids that know each other, so that doesn't count as much. But Notre Dame, Oregon, to some degree Michigan, etc. Some of the schools in colder weather temperatures, that's different because the kids don't know each other as much. So that's more important. But like the Florida schools and down south, all those kids know each other for the most part. So this is cool for them too. It's one thing to text with somebody or send a DM on X. It's quite another to meet somebody and shake their hand. So there's some relationship building there. Quarterback recruits typically try to get the guys that are like the O-linemen in particular, protecting their backside figuratively and literally. They try to talk to them a lot to get the skill guys going and everything. So it's a hodgepodge, but it's more important again at Oregon, because a lot of these kids don't know each other personally.
Yeah, and Blake Woodby's not a name that I've mentioned on the show before.
He's good.
Yeah, he's got a lot of different schools interested in him. You know, Ohio State has got the crystal ball on 24/7 Sports. Is this the sort of event, is this the sort of weekend that can shift the tide in Oregon's favor for a guy like that? Or do you get the sense that Woodby is, you know, seeing what's out there, exploring his options, but ultimately he knows, yeah, Ohio State is probably the spot where he wants to end up?
Woodby's a really good kid to talk to. I met him last summer, elite talent. I think he could go anywhere. He's been at a program that's big time. He understands the scene. Like, he's been a recruit for a while. I don't think it would bother him to go across the country, and I don't think it would bother him whether somebody thinks he is or isn't going to Ohio State. He could care less. If the visit to Oregon warrants it, he would make them his leader. He's his own man. So Oregon's got as good a chance as anybody. What somebody does now, the same thing I was just talking about a second ago, he's familiar with Ohio State. Maryland kids are familiar with Big Ten programs. And now that Oregon's in it, that helps a little bit, but it's still on the left coast. He probably couldn't pick out Oregon on the map. So that's just the reality of an East Coast kid. But seeing it firsthand, this is their chance to move up the ranks quickly and hopefully solidify an official visit date and put them at the top of the board.
Well, hopefully he just knows, number one, we do not still use covered wagons, which is a real thing. I had someone ask me when I went to college in the state of California. From the East, I swear to God, cross my heart, hope to die. Someone thought
weird.
I know. That's what that hopefully he's got more of an impression of Oregon than that at this point in his career. Yeah, I know. One of the craziest interactions I have ever had. I was like, you think that we're still lit? No, this is Oregon Trail is a video game. It's just that. But Oregon's got a lot of big time targets in their sights in 2025. One of whom is a name we have not discussed yet here on the show. Before we get to that, let's talk about Monopoly Go. So I've got a competitive side, I admit it, and my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. So you might have heard of it. If not, you certainly have now. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. The best part is messing with your friends. You can charge them rent on iconic properties just like Monopoly. But now you can heist their vaults of riches for yourself. And the leaderboards show you who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. Not just my competitive side that loves it, or yours as well. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. This episode also brought to you by our friends over at GameTime. So GameTime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, of which many of you know I'm a big fan. Tickets to Major League Baseball events are faster and easier, and prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60%, which last time I checked is more than half, for last-minute buying on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you want. GameTime's got it, and you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Brian, so a five-star name that has popped up on Oregon's recruiting radar for the 2025 class is Michael Fasusi. I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. Yes. Number 3 overall tackle in the 2025 cycle. Oregon isn't having him on campus this weekend, but they reportedly, according to my guy Max Torres, had him on campus last weekend for a visit. A guy of this caliber is going to have a lot of schools in the mix, but it looks like Oregon is starting to make a push.
The Texas schools, Oklahoma, Oregon, and probably a lot of others still trying, would love to have him. I know firsthand from somebody that Oregon speaks with that he's very, very high on their board, and not like the top guy on the tackle board. They really want him. I don't know if he'll leave that area. Texas and Texas A&M have just as much, if not more, NIL money than even Oregon, if possible. So it's going to be interesting. But this is a kid that's really dedicated to his craft, and he is crazy athletic. This is the kind of guy that ends up in the NFL for a long, long time. He's got an incredibly high ceiling. If you can get a kid like this, it can be a 3-and-out. I mean, I don't want to say he's the same guy that played at Oregon that went to the Lions, but he's in that kind of physical kind of deal. Like it's just a rare talent. So I don't know how it will go for a Texas kid to go to Oregon, because you always wonder about that. Some like it, some don't, but they're in the mix, and they're like the only one on the West Coast that's like that, like that's really in with him. I'm curious to see how his official visits go, and I think he's going to take one. I was just texting with my buddy, and he knows him well, and he doesn't know where he's going either. Like his recruitment is a big mystery. A&M's the one that's talked about the most, and they've got a lot of NIL and stuff too. So this is a fascinating recruitment that could play out way down the road.
Yeah, and he's crystal ball to Texas, as I mentioned. Now, I saw that he was going to go to Oklahoma, but then he tweeted out he was not going to go to Oklahoma's campus. That to me can scream one of a couple things. Number one, I'm no longer interested in the school, or number two, I know where I'm going to commit. I'm just not announcing it yet. But it sounds like from what you're saying that that's not the case, and that shouldn't be an indicator that, well, he's really dialed in on going to Texas, and that Oregon, still could have an opportunity to get him to commit to the Ducks.
They absolutely do. He mentioned in an interview recently that like the A&M, he's got what he's going to talk about. He's taking his family down there. He's starting to narrow his focus, but he's not done. If somebody wants to pick Texas, they're more than welcome. I mean, that's a low-hanging fruit for an in-state kid. I mean, it's Texas. I mean, anybody can, I can do that too. But I don't think he really knows based on the intel I've got. And one of the guys I know has trained it before. So it's a long way to go.
Yeah, and hopefully Oregon's able to stay in the running there, but certainly they've ratcheted up the intensity on that front. Let's hop to a mailbag question here that I thought you'd be a good person to ask, Brian. YouTube comments or X, formerly known as Twitter, as you all know. If you want priority access, go join the flock over at Subtext. This from Dr. Classic MD, which means we've got a doctor in the house, clearly. How much will Oregon players' NFL draft success impact recruiting this year? Do we need at least one or two players to go in the first round to inspire confidence in recruits, or does it matter?
It's a great question. The problem with it, it's a splinter question. Let me give you an example. If you're a great program in any particular position, even after that coach leaves or a couple of those guys leave, it doesn't matter. Recruits aren't that smart to know that. LSU is still known as DBU. Did you watch any of LSU's spring game? Don't. They have one of the worst secondaries in college football.
Their defense last year was atrocious. It was actually horrible.
It is continuing on that path. It's unfathomable in Louisiana because per capita, that's as good a state as there is in the country. horrendous. So whatever, but kids, it's just once a kid gets something in his mind, a teenage boy, it's not easy to ratchet it out of his mind either. So I don't know how that's going to work, but there are certain things with that. If you can get just one guy here or there, they'll go like obviously the receiving group last year for Oregon was tremendous. One of them's getting drafted. They had guys on the defensive line that were good, but they were younger. You can sell it different ways. And, Uliungalei, I think is just going to be a tremendous NFL player once he develops. I think out of that group, he'll be the best. Maybe I'm wrong, but I love him. So they can sell that. There's a lot of ways to look at it. But Oregon's got somebody drafted every year. The what have you done for me lately, though, thing for certain kids matters. Like DJ Pickett loves LSU as an example, but I think once he sees them this fall, that may change. Because I don't think DJ.
Well, but that could also be a selling point to him of, hey, you're going to come in and play as a true freshman. We need you, right? We've got Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. We've got guys on that side, but we need you.
LSU can score. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, LSU has not had a problem scoring the ball the last couple of years. And I'm with you, Brian. It's so strange to watch LSU be bad at defense. That's just
They were guys looking at each other after plays, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, it was a JV game in Tiger Stadium.
Yeah, they were USC South. That is 100%. Exactly what LSU, which is crazy. It's crazy to see that happen.
But that's where Oregon can take advantage. Like they've got a good defense. I think their staff is a little underrated. I don't know if Lanning is, Nick Saban on Saturdays, but everything else that takes forever. It's an experience thing. Everything else about that program screams Southeastern Conference, and I think the draft is helping them. It's more position specific. The offensive tackle, look, when you got a guy that goes top 5, top 6 in the draft, he's an all-pro, you're going to sell that until he retires and even after that.
Yep.
It's one player. I could have coached that guy. I know, the coach that coached him at Oregon. He gave me more superlatives about him. Didn't say one thing about himself. He said it was all him. He just learned it and worked hard. He was just the biggest freak ever. Kids don't look at it that way. They think they're the same. It's not true, but that's still the way they look at it. So, yeah, draft helps, but it's more position specific. So,
and Penei Sewell got a big time contract for an offensive tackle.
That helps too.
Yeah, that guy is.
Oregon's sending that out, and they should.
Right.
The guys like Fasusi. I would. I'm sure you would as well.
Yeah, because you can, allow guys to connect dots in their head. Like, I go there, I can do that. I can be the next one.
Ridiculous, but
of
that's
those guys.
What they sell to 100%.
Hey, it's all about salesmanship. I wanted to get a little portal chatter here, and then we're going to get some 2024 recruiting film breakdowns here for guys that may very well see the field in front of fans for the first time on Saturday for the Ducks. But the top 3 portal targets who I've looked at here on the show for the Ducks: Texas A&M safety Jacoby Matthews, and then a pair of defensive tackles, TCU's Dominic Williams and Michigan State's Derek Harmon. Do you have any idea when guys go into the portal, when they have a do not contact tag, which none of these guys do, is my understanding, then guys typically have an idea of where they're going. But I've been getting a number of questions over the last couple of days, like, hey, what's up with Williams? Or like, hey, anything on Jacoby Matthews? And my response is, I haven't heard anything. Have you heard anything on any of those names?
There's a variety of things, but let me put this in perspective. I got pretty good information on a player yesterday, nothing to do with Oregon, and I did a story on it. Opened my inbox this morning. Guess what? That school said it's not true. And like the source was tremendous, but this source was in the office at the school.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, I'll go with that one. So you got to be really careful. It's different with the portal because like with high school kids, there are guys that commit and go to a school and all that. And I knew them for 2 or 3 years. Something doesn't work out 2 years later. They're in the portal. There's a guy I'm getting ready to do a show on. I know the kid personally. I don't have to look up his film. I used to go to his games and stuff. So I could probably reach out to him, but he's the exception to the rule. Most guys in my industry have no freaking idea. If you don't know somebody on that staff or something and it's still secondhand, good luck. Totally different deal. So when they announce like on Twitter or whatever, hey, I've got an official visit, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, that's your best bet. The portal is the Wild West. even guys like Wilt Fong, et cetera, it's not the same. We get information here and there, but it's random. Dominic, the Williams kid out of TCU, he's the best bet of that group. Started as a true freshman for a team that went to the national title game at defensive tackle. That is as rare as
that's hard. Yeah, he was a freshman All-American.
Yeah, he was 290 pounds, and he was fairly highly recruited, but he went there, and a lot of schools are probably agitated they didn't put their foot down on him more. I mean, I don't care what school you're at. If you start at D tackle, even if it's Tennessee Martin as a freshman, you're pretty good. That's just not a normal position. And he was good as a sophomore again. I've been told the NIL number for that one is absurd. So whatever, that's just a buy me now kind of deal.
Yeah.
It's awkward. And I'm guessing the do not disturb kind of deal is depending on your paycheck. I'd imagine there's ways around that anyway. Everything goes through intermediaries. So
right.
David Martinez has got an agent in Miami. You think he's really fielding the calls? No. So I'd imagine that all these guys, the kid from Michigan State, another kid that was a little bit overlooked, but he's massive. He's had pretty good production. I mean, you got to take that kid. He's 320 pounds.
Yeah.
Any 320 guy that can be productive? Hell yes. So D tackle is by far this spring the number one position. There's never enough of them, but it's weird. We were just talking about LSU. They are uber thin. Of all schools, LSU. Yeah, I know. It's just like that.
Go figure.
Their guys to the draft early that killed them. They couldn't afford one, let alone two, and it happened. So when you got schools like that, Auburn just took two. I mean, the number is really low. If you're going to get somebody, you're paying way over market. So like $1 million for a pretty good player would not surprise me. There's a kid I know that was offered $500,000 that was sort of a co-starter who's not very good. So I could only imagine what Dominic was offered.
Oh, man. Oh, boy.
Yeah, so,
well,
it's crazy.
This show has done well over the last few weeks, but I do not have that sort of pocket change on hand. I'm glad that somebody does for the good of the Ducks. But two more names to get to in the 2024 class that we have not broken down for film yet, and we might see at least one of them in the spring game on Saturday. Before we get to Ryan Pellum and Roger Saleapaga, this episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Not the Oregon spring game per se, but everything else you could want to bet. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether you win or lose. That's simple. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. So, what are you waiting for? I don't know either. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. All right, Brian, let's continue our film examinations here. We'll start with Ryan Pellum, then we'll get to Roger Saleapaga. And Pellum is a guy who, look, I don't expect him to play as a true freshman. I think there's one area where he could, and that's in the return game, because Oregon right now, I've talked about this throughout the offseason. I did not like Oregon's kick return game. I think Tez Johnson as a punt returner was good, but the kick return game, the numbers bear out that just wasn't very good. They didn't have a single kick return over 25 yards last year with a variety of guys, and Gary Bryant Jr. was kind of the lead returner and whatnot. So I think that should be an open position battle for Oregon going into next year. That's a way that a true freshman could crack the rotation if he wouldn't otherwise. And Pellum is a guy that just brings a lot to the table on that front.
I like his ability to make guys miss. He's got a lot of moxie. He knows he's good. Not the biggest fella in the world. He's definitely a slot, at least for now, until he adds a little weight. But yeah, as a return guy, I think, he's got to at least be in the mix. The only thing that I would say there is Oregon looks at this two ways. Yes, he can help us there, but freshmen tend to do what when they get their hands on the ball?
Fumble.
Yeah, fumble.
They can.
So they
can. I mean, that's not necessarily the word on him. It's just that
at the college level, it's a whole different deal.
True freshman is tough.
I worry about his strength. When somebody pops him, holds him up, and the next guy comes in that benches 415, wants to rip the ball out. And that's exactly what Oregon staff's going to look at too. Because if he was on the other team, that's what they would try to do. So I still think he's more likely to be a reserve receiver and get some reps. Later in the season's more likely. They need to see it for a while. This is a team that should make the playoff. They're not going to jack around with having a freshman in a playoff game as their punt returner. I can all but guarantee you that. I wouldn't like it either. But, man, he can run. The only thing about him, he needs to improve tremendously as a route runner. He was so physically gifted, he just ran away from guys in high school. He's got a long way to go there, which most guys do. But once Pellum gets that, man, he's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and in 2025, Oregon's receiver room is just going to be in a state of massive flux. Evan Stewart probably off to the NFL.
Bye.
And then Trayshawn Holden, Tez Johnson, Gary Bryant, they're all out of eligibility, and there will be just a big void. And, I mean, the next two guys that I think will be on the receiver depth chart for this year are Jerion Dickey and Kyler Casper. And, Dickey could play in the slot a little, but Kyler Casper's not playing in the slot. And Dickey's probably most well-suited to play on the outside. So that slot receiver position, I think, is pretty wide. The Tez Johnson role is pretty wide open in 2025. And Pellum's a guy who, if he puts on that sort of weight and refines his route running a little bit, has that yards after catch ability that you love in someone who, not that he couldn't necessarily catch the ball down the field, but he's not the biggest guy out there. You're not going to throw him, 50-50 jump balls. You're going to throw him the ball over the middle. You want him to catch it on a slant, on a drag, on a deep dig, or a crossing route, and then you want him to make plays after the catch. I feel like that's where he'll really thrive one day.
I've seen him do it at the high school level, but you're right. He's going to get beat up on 50-50 balls his first year or so. Needs to add 10, 12 pounds. Then it's a different deal. Until then, sometimes it's okay just to run a screen and let them chase the rabbit.
Yeah.
It's okay. That's what he is. He's a rabbit.
Right. Let's get to the other guy whose film we're talking about here, and that's Roger Saleapaga. One of the most interesting prospects, I think, in this 2024 class for Oregon. He reminds me of Kingston Lopa from the defensive side of the ball in that I see positional versatility here because he's listed on 24/7 Sports as a wide receiver. I think he could play tight end, Brian. Am I nuts?
No, he's a flex tight end pretty much right now. That's the way he is. I mean, there are kids in the South that are listed that way. They're even more athletic than him that are listed. Big tight ends that play out wide are just receivers. You can call it flex tight end. It's just a big split end because they're not blocking anybody. Who cares? And that kid will go into a crowded room and go up and take a pounding and catch the football. He's kind of nuts. He kind of fits the old school mentality of a blocking tight end, but he's not quite there weight-wise. 210, 220, somewhere in that range. But he's tough as nails, has great hands, and he'll go into the middle of the field. Oregon needs those kind of guys. So I bet he's 235-ish by the time he's done filling out at Oregon, and he'll be a nightmare in the screen game, et cetera, as a blocker, and he could be really good in the red zone too.
Yeah, I like his size. He's I think he's 6'3", 6'4",
correct,
in that sort of range. And what stands out on his film is you just look at him and go, all right, so he's tall, but he's also got really good timing, and he's got that ability to be a legitimate red zone or 50-50 ball kind of target. I see a little bit of Terrence Ferguson in him. Kenyon Sadiq is a guy that I think could easily be Oregon's tight end one for 2025, and I think he takes a big step forward this year. Tremendously talented player who also, Sadiq that is, played receiver in high school or just kind of lined up out wide. Sadiq played a little as a true freshman. He has bulked up, I think he said 20, 25 pounds a little bit in the offseason. Now he looks more physically ready while still maintaining that great athleticism. But is there a player in today's college football or the NFL that you would jump to with Saleapaga and say, yeah, he reminds me of this guy. He's that sort of target, or the way that you can get him the football?
I don't know if I'd go with one specific guy, but I mean, Kittle was like 200 pounds when he enrolled at Iowa. So sometimes you can't.
George Kittle, that is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying he's George Kittle, by the way. Kittle's extremely fast. But he went from a wide receiver all the way to just straight up tight end because he's a dominant blocker too. He's about as rare as it gets. So you just don't know how big guys are going to be able to go up to and still keep their twitch and their nastiness. But again, he's a physical kid and he's got size. So I think there's just a lot of guys in that mold now. And if you don't have one, it hurts you in the screen game and it hurts you in the red zone. Everybody wants somebody like this. And this is a targeted player to fit that role, I think, by Dan Lanning and the Ducks.
Yeah, and I hope that, at least one, if not both of these guys see a little bit of run or get to make a play or two in the spring game, because we can look at film, but at the end of the day, depending on where kids are coming from, the quality of competition they're going up against, you don't always know. But I think you get a better idea of what a true freshman's timeline is when you watch him in this sort of environment. Perfect example is Jaleel Florence, who you may remember from Oregon's class of 2022, and he came in as a true freshman, played in the spring game, and I remember watching him thinking, he got beat on this play, but he looks physically like he's ready to be out there, and he looks fast enough to play, and he just seems like he's going to have a timeline to play that's quicker than a lot of other true freshmen. And what do you know? He played a significant role in 2022. He was Oregon's number 2 starting quarter in 2023. He's probably that again, assuming health, in 2024 as well. So that's kind of what I look for with these guys in the spring game, is how do they look when you're surrounded only by Division I, Oregon football caliber bodies? Because in the high school film, as you know, Brian, they're surrounded by what? Sometimes 2 or 3, or if you're in a really good area, maybe 7 or 8 Division I players. But now when it's all around you, I think that's just a good moniker for fans to look at and go, okay, yeah, that guy's ready, or no, that guy's not ready yet.
You can tell usually, even if they're not going against great competition, because they'll dominate it. If it's a kid that doesn't want to put his foot down on your throat, those are the kids I worry about no matter what their competition is. Like South Florida, there are times when there are 18, 19 guys that are Power 5 kids on the field at once. But there's still a guy out there that wants to dominate everybody. You got to look at it that way. That determination, that kind of separates good from great. So this kid, he wanted to pop everybody in the nose with how he played. So he'll be fine at Oregon.
Great stuff as always. Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.